He is a billionaire, a mafia boss, the most feared man in Seoul. She is an intern from America who just fell into his chest in front of everyone, and then had the nerve to smile about it. Kong Dohan has an empire that runs both the skyline and the underground. Billions of dollars. A name that makes grown men look away when they say it. And a heart that 13 years of everything life threw at him never once managed to touch. Every woman who tried walked away with nothing. Not because he was cruel, because he felt absolutely nothing. No flutter, no crack, no nothing. Billionaire in public, mafia boss in the dark. And in both worlds, untouchable, unreachable, unmovable. They called him the Ice King long before they knew the full truth of what he was. Because ice does not feel. Ice does not bend. Ice does not choose anyone. Until her. Until a girl in a blue dress hit his chest, looked up at the most feared man in Seoul, tapped his cheek like he was someone completely ordinary, smiled like he was someone entirely forgettable, and walked away. It took one intern approximately 4 seconds to crack what 13 years of darkness could not. The ice was already breaking. He just did not know it yet. Hey, before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is in your country. Every single time I post, I see people coming in from all over the world and I genuinely love it. Let me see you down there. Now let us get into this story, because I promise you, you are not ready for what this man is about to go through. The morning after the gala, the photos had taken over everything. Kong Dohan, the man who had never been photographed looking at anyone, standing completely still with his hand on the waist of a woman in a blue dress while the whole room stared. By 6 a.m., it had taken over every feed in Korea. By 9 a.m., every entertainment site carried the same 3 words as a headline. Who is she? Mira Stone found out she was famous the way most people find out bad news. From a coworker with a phone shoved in her face before she finished her first coffee. She stared at the photo. He has a good jawline, I will give him that. Her colleague stared back at her. Mira, that is Kong Dohan. He owns half of Seoul. Okay. The other half is scared of him. Mira handed the phone back and went to check on her patients. She had not come to Seoul to be somebody's headline. She had come to become somebody. There was a difference, and she did not have time to explain it before rounds. By noon, the entire floor had gone quiet in the specific way that means something is wrong. 2 men in black suits stood at the entrance of the ward, still as furniture, watching her with the patient, unhurried attention of people who are very good at waiting. The head nurse appeared at Mira's elbow with the expression of a woman delivering a terminal diagnosis. Kong Dohan would like to see you. Tell him I am with a patient. Mira said it without looking up from her chart. She was not with a patient. The men waited 4 hours without moving, without speaking, without checking their phones. When Mira walked out at the end of her shift, they were gone. Nothing left behind except one white card on her windshield. No name, no logo. Just a floor number written in ink so deliberate it looked less like handwriting and more like a command. She should have thrown it away. She knew that. She put it in her coat pocket. That same night, across the city, Jin-ho stepped outside Dohan's office and made a call to a number saved under no name. 3 words. It has started. The person on the other end did not ask who. They already knew. And somewhere in a building Mira had never visited, a man she had never met smiled at his phone and said nothing at all. The transfer papers arrived at 7 a.m. They had reassigned her. Executive Health Consultation. Kong Group Headquarters. Effective immediately. The hospital director called Mira in and spent 4 minutes finding different ways to avoid eye contact while he explained it. I did not apply for a transfer, she said. No, he agreed. Did anyone ask me? A long pause. Kong Group made a contribution to the hospital research fund this morning. The number he named had too many zeros to say out loud comfortably. Mira understood exactly what happened. Her visa, her program, her entire future in Korea. All of it lived inside a system that just got quietly rearranged, expensively rearranged. She stood up, picked up her bag, walked to the door. "Tell them I will be there at 8, and I take my coffee black." She walked into Dohan's office at 7:58 a.m., put her bag directly on his desk, looked at him without blinking. "I want it on record that I did not apply for this job." "Noted," he said. "Good." She pulled out her tablet. "Are you actually sick or just bored?" Something moved across his face, there and gone in under 1 second, so fast she almost missed it. She took his blood pressure, checked his sleep data, told him he was dehydrated, prescribed nothing, left in under 40 minutes without looking back once. He watched her walk out. Jin-ho appeared in the doorway. "She called you bored. To your face." Dohan said nothing. He turned back to the window. That night, Jin-ho sent one message to the number saved under no name. She is not afraid of him. The reply arrived in 4 seconds. One word. Perfect. Mira got home to find her medical school photograph turned to face the wall, the one with her mother's handwriting on the back. She lives alone, no visitors in weeks. She stood in her kitchen staring at it and told herself it must have fallen. She almost believed it. She used the card. 30, second floor, 9 p.m. The elevator opened onto a private rooftop garden sitting above the entire city, impossibly quiet. The lights kept low, the kind of place that does not exist in buildings like this, unless someone built it specifically to disappear into. Dohan stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking like he owned the whole city. Which he did. But up here, he looked smaller than that, more human than that. They talked, real talking, the kind neither of them planned and neither of them knew how to stop once it started. She noticed the scars on his hands, old ones, deep ones, the kind a CEO has no business having. She asked about them the way doctors ask, directly, without apology. He deflected. She let him. She told him why she really came to Seoul, not the career answer, the honest one. To prove I do not need anyone. He went very quiet. She watched something move across his face and understood without being told that this man had said those exact words to himself a very long time ago and had been paying for it ever since. "Did it work?" he asked. She smiled. "Ask me in 6 months." He almost smiled back. Almost. Neither of them noticed how small the space between them had become until her phone buzzed and broke the moment apart. She left first. He watched her go and did not move for a long time after the elevator closed. What neither of them saw was the camera watching from a dark window across the street. The man behind it sent one photograph to Park Sung-jin with a single caption. Sung-jin studied it for a long time. The Ice King. The intern. The space between them smaller than it had any business being. He smiled for the first time in 3 years. Then he picked up his phone. "Begin," he said quietly, and ended the call. The relationship built itself in stolen pieces and neither of them stopped it. Late messages she told herself she would not send. Early mornings at Kong Group she stopped explaining. He started finding reasons to keep her 5 more minutes every evening. She started finding reasons why 5 more minutes was completely fine. She called him Dohan by accident on a Wednesday afternoon, just his name, no title. He stopped mid-sentence. She did not apologize. He did not ask her to. They both pretended it did not happen. Neither of them thought about anything else for the rest of the day. Then, one night, over terrible vending machine coffee in an empty conference room at 11 p.m., he asked about her mother. She told him more than she planned. He listened in a way that felt like being held without anyone touching anyone. She drove home thinking about her mother, about the way her mother used to light up every time he called, about the way that light looked from a 10-year-old standing in the doorway watching it, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Because even at 10, Mira already knew. That kind of light eventually burns the whole house down. She had promised herself she would never become that lamp. She was starting to feel very warm. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would pull back, be professional, be distant. This would stop before it became something she could not walk away from. The next morning she walked into Kong Group with every wall rebuilt, and Dohan's office sat empty, phone going straight to voicemail. By noon, nobody would tell her where he was. Then Jin-ho appeared beside her desk like a shadow and said quietly, "Go home tonight, Miss Stone. Lock your door. Do not open it for anyone." He walked away before she could form a single question. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One photograph of her, taken that morning, outside her building before she got into the cab. Someone had been standing directly behind her and she never knew. Hey, real quick. If this story already has you feeling something and you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like on this video. Share this with your people, your friends, your family, anyone in your life who deserves a story this good. It costs you nothing and it means everything. Now back to Mira, because she is about to make a decision she cannot take back. Dohan came back the next morning without explanation. She did not ask, but the way she looked at him said everything. Shin Yona arrived without an appointment at 11 a.m. She walked into Dohan's office and placed a document on his desk like someone placing a verdict. An alliance proposal, written like a marriage contract, because that is exactly what it was. She spoke about legacy, obligation, bloodlines, the kind of language that sounds like culture and operates like a trap. She looked out the window when she spoke, the way people look at things they already own. On her way out, she stopped in the hallway. Mira stood there. They looked at each other. Yona tilted her head slightly, the way you study something when you are calculating its value. "You are very far from home," she said pleasantly. Then she smiled and walked to the elevator and made a call before the doors closed. Mira stood in the hallway and felt for the first time the exact shape of the world she had walked into. She went back to her desk. She tried to work. She could not work. Something about the way that woman looked at her sat in her chest like a stone she could not shift. Not threatened, not angry, just calculating, like Mira was a variable someone had just identified and written down. That evening, a package arrived at her apartment. Inside sat a printed list, 6 women's names. Each one had a date beside it and 2 words after. Left soul. At the bottom, in different ink, fresher, darker. A 7th name. Her name. No date yet. She turned the page over. 1 line on the back. They all thought he would choose them, too. Mira sat on her kitchen floor with that paper in both hands and made a decision. She was going to walk into Kong Dohan's office and look him in the eye and ask him exactly who he was. And whatever he said next was going to change everything. She walked into his office at midnight. She did not knock. She stood across his desk and looked at him directly. "Are you Mafia?" He looked at her for a long time, the kind of long that most people cannot hold without looking away. Mira held it without blinking. Then he did the one thing she did not expect. He told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He told her about his father, about the night everything ended, about the men who came and how they knew exactly which door to walk through, because his father had left it open for someone he loved. He said he decided at 17 that he would never leave a door open again, that keeping everyone out was the only way to keep everything safe. Mira was quiet for a long time. "You think I am a door," she said. He said nothing. She looked at him. "I think you have spent so long afraid of someone using a door against you that you forgot you are locked inside too." The space between them across that desk sat very small and very loud. He did not close it. He stood, straightened his jacket. "Go home, Mira. Lock your door. Tonight." She went home. She locked the door. She stood against it in the dark and realized she had completely stopped pulling back somewhere between his truth and the elevator ride down. At 2 a.m. her phone rang. Unknown number. A man's voice. Calm, unhurried. almost kind in a way that made her uncomfortable.
Miss Stone, I know things about Kong Dohan's father that Dohan himself has never heard. Things about the night he died that certain people worked very hard to keep buried. A pause. The question is whether you want the truth, or the version that keeps things comfortable.
The line went dead before she could speak. She sat in the dark until sunrise. She did not call Dohan, but she did not delete the number either. Dohan knew someone inside his circle leaked information. He built 4 separate pieces of false intelligence, each one perfectly believable, each one completely different. He delivered one to each of the 4 people closest to him, and waited without telling anyone what he had done. 3 days later, the trail pointed back to Jinho so clearly it almost felt cruel. He called Jinho into his office, closed the door, sat across from him and asked one question. How long? Jinho told him everything. 2 years. The private arrangement with Sungjin. The fear that Dohan's isolation would eventually collapse everything. The decision to build a way out before the walls came down. He said he never expected Dohan to feel something for someone. He said by the time he understood what was happening between Dohan and Mira, he was already too far in to surface. Dohan listened without moving. When Jinho finished, Dohan stood, walked to the door, opened it. The out of soul by morning. He did not go home. He sat alone in his office until 2 a.m. Then his phone lit up. Mira calling. He picked up and said nothing. She said nothing either. She just stayed on the line. 40 full minutes of silence. He listened to her breathe, and it was the closest he had ever let anyone live inside the space where he actually existed. Then she spoke quietly. Someone called me. They said they know the truth about your father. That the night he died is not what you were told. The silence that followed had a temperature. Do not call that number back. His voice came out completely flat. Not the man from the rooftop, the other one. Do not go anywhere alone. The line went dead. Mira sat in the dark holding her phone. She had now heard 2 completely different versions of Kong Dohan. She no longer felt certain which one was real, or whether the truth underneath both versions was something either of them could survive. Dohan moved without a single weapon. He used documentation. Financial records going back 13 years. Conversations between powerful people who believed with complete confidence that nobody kept records. He took apart Sungjin's entire network the way you remove the foundation from a building, quietly, from the bottom, so that by the time anyone looked up, the walls were already coming down on their own. Business partners received visits from serious people carrying organized folders. Contracts that existed for years collapsed inside 72 hours. 2 board members who fed information to the Shin family found their own private financial histories suddenly and completely public. Nobody needed touching. The paperwork did everything. Sungjin received one message from Dohan. No words, just a photograph of Sungjin himself, outside his own building, taken that same morning. A quiet reminder that surveillance moves in every direction. Sungjin stared at it and understood he had miscalculated. He thought threatening Mira would shatter Dohan. He did not understand that Mira gave Dohan something to fight for. And a man with something to fight for becomes the most dangerous version of himself. Dohan found Mira at the hospital at 6 a.m., still in her scrubs, cold coffee in front of her. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Sit down," she said. "You look absolutely terrible." He sat. She got him coffee. They sat together in the break room in complete silence, and it was the most peace either of them felt in longer than they could remember. Then, on his way out, a woman stepped into the corridor in front of him. Someone he had never seen. Older, still. Carrying the patience of someone who waited a very long time for one specific moment. "Your father sent me," she said quietly. She held out an envelope. His name across the front in handwriting he had not seen in 23 years. His father's handwriting. He knew this day would come. He wanted you to have the truth before anyone told it to you wrong. Dohan took the envelope with steady hands. He walked out into the early morning with 13 years of certainty, feeling very fragile in his jacket pocket. Dohan read the letter alone. His father had known. Not everything, but enough. He knew in the months before he died that what came for him was not random, not an outside enemy finding a lucky opening. Someone inside arranged it. And in the letter, written carefully, sealed, trusted to a woman with one instruction and enough faith to last 2 decades, he wrote down the name of the person who made it all happen. The name was not Sung Jin. The name belonged to someone Dohan trusted without a single moment of doubt for 13 consecutive years. Someone who stood beside him the night his father died and helped him build every wall that followed. Someone who needed those walls to stay standing, because the moment Dohan stopped being the Ice King and started feeling things again, he would start looking backward. And looking backward led directly to the truth. We do not say the name out loud yet, but Dohan's face when he finishes reading says everything. He sits with it for a long time. Then he cancels his entire day, every meeting, every call, everything. And he goes to find Mira. She sits on the rooftop, their rooftop, already there like some part of her knew before he did. She does not ask why he looks the way he looks. She just moves over so he can sit beside her. He tells her he loves her with soul spread out below them. It does not come out dramatic or rehearsed. It comes out the way things come out when they have waited too long. True and a little raw and completely without performance. She looks at him for one quiet moment, then she reaches up and taps his cheek. Twice. Light, easy. Exactly like the first night when she did not even know his name. I know, she says. He almost smiles. He is getting so close now. They build something that looks nothing like what either of them planned. Mira finishes her program. Dohan begins dismantling the parts of the empire built in darkness. They have coffee at 11 p.m. They sit on the rooftop. He talks more than he ever has. She stays every time. One morning, she asks about the letter. He hands it to her without hesitating. She reads every word, folds it, sets it down, takes his hand. The scarred one, the tattooed one, the one that reached for her the first night without thinking. She holds it without saying a word. He lets her. Then her phone rings. Unknown number. She answers. A woman's voice. Smooth. Patient. The same voice from months ago. This time it does not ask anything. It delivers. 7 words. Spoken quietly like a door opening onto a room that was never supposed to exist. His father is not dead, Mira Stone. The line goes dead. She lowers the phone. Dohan watches her from across the rooftop with his coffee going cold in both hands. She looks at him. This man she chose. This man who read a dead man's letter and came to find her the same morning. And she understands with complete clarity that whatever sits on the other side of this moment will either finish building them or finish breaking them. She also understands she is not going anywhere. Dohan, she says. He puts his coffee down without looking away. We need to talk. Something moves across his face. Not the crack from the first night. Not the wall from the 13 years before her. Something new. Something without a name yet. But it feels like the beginning of one. I know. He says. The city comes alive below them. Neither of them looks away. Some people spend their whole lives building walls and calling it strength. Dohan did it for 13 years, had it perfected. The cold face, the empty office, the name that made entire rooms go quiet the moment someone said it. He built every single wall himself and told himself that was what power looked like. Then a girl in a blue dress fell into his chest, did not apologize, tapped his cheek, smiled, and walked away. And all that power could not tell him what to do next. This story is not really about a mafia boss falling in love. It is about what happens when the thing you built to protect yourself becomes the thing slowly destroying you. Dohan was not the Ice King because he was strong. He was the Ice King because he was afraid. And fear wearing an expensive suit and sitting behind billions of dollars still looks exactly like fear when the right person gets close enough to see it. Mira was not fearless either. She carried her own walls, her own reasons, her own version of leaving before she could be left. She just wore hers differently. Two people, same wound, different armor. And somehow, in a city neither of them fully belonged to, they found each other in the most ridiculous way possible. She fell, he caught her. And neither of them has been the same since. That is not a love story. That is a restoration story. The ice did not just break. It melted. Slowly. The way things melt when something warm finally decides to stay. If this story did something to you tonight, if it sat somewhere in your chest and refused to move, then you already know you cannot miss what comes next. Subscribe right now, because the next chapter is where everything Dohan thought he knew about the night his father died gets turned completely upside down. And Mira is going to have to decide how much truth she can hold before it changes how she sees the man she chose. You do not want to find out from someone else. Subscribe and tell me where in the world you're watching from, and I will see you there.